Hey guys, so I just wanted to give you a review of all the new Luminosity mask panels that are out there. It wasn't that long ago where we had to create luminosity masks manually in a very painful way, going through the channels and intersecting channels, things like that. So now we have all these powerful options, and I want to show you the differences between them so you can decide which one's the best for you. Because really each of them has their own style of doing things. So it's up to you to decide which one is going to work the best for you. So first off, I just want to show you how each of them look, kind of how they function. So on the left here, we got the new TK panel version 5. It's totally different from version 4. It's now broken up into different panels that you can move around as you see fit. So you can set them up the way that works for your workflow and for your screen. So this top panel is the control panel, and this just gives you a lot of things that help you control Photoshop better. So it's mainly Photoshop functions with a little bit of extra built into them. So, and you can see Tony has added some things down here to where you can actually see a description of each function, and it looks a little bit better now with icons that correspond with each adjustment layer and tool. And then down here, the main panel is called the Rapid Mask, and this is where you create your actual luminosity masks. Looks totally different from version 4. Not quite as intuitive, but it is much more powerful. And then you've got the Actions tab, which gives you just some more tools that help you further refine your image. So things like the Orton effect, vignette, clarity, and web sharpening. So there's a lot of different tools in here. Tony isn't known as a great graphic designer, so his panels have never really looked great, but they've always functioned really well. So you're going to have to get over that hump if you want to use them of just it doesn't look good to the eye. At least he's added settings to where I can change the color, because before default it comes with these really saturated ugly colors that just are not pleasing to the eye. So at least you can turn down the saturation of these to make them look a little bit better. Next up is the ADP panel made by Aaron Dowling. And this is an extremely functional panel. I really like this one. It's pretty intuitive to use. The design of it is decent. It's not incredibly pleasing and functional to the eye, but it's once you get used to it, it's pretty good. You've got 3 panels up here, one for your masks, one for this auto adjust, which I'll show a little more, and then the other tools kind of like the actions in Tony's panel. So overall, it looks pretty good. You've got some decent icons. It's pretty flat gray is the only thing I don't like. But it does at least have this gradient back here that makes it look a little more intuitive. Next up, Lumenzia. Design-wise, this is the best looking panel. This one's made by Greg Benz. It's very intuitive of how he has all the luminosity masks laid out on this gradient, and the way you can mask by color, etc. So you have some basic tools down here, and it looks really nice. And when you hover over each button, it gives you more information and more functions of if you hold down Control or Shift using the tools. And as you can see, it's super simple. There's nothing else to it. It's just this one panel. There's no tabs. The only thing you can actually scroll through is this mode. But other than that, what you see is what you get. It's really simple, really elegant looking. Rhea Pro 2. This one is kind of like ADP panel in its looks. It's really flat gray. It's not too exciting to look at. There's a lot of menus buried. So you have the blend tab, and then you have different pages of stuff in this tab. And then you have the enhance, which has more things buried inside of it. Then you have finish, and finally just some information. This panel isn't exactly going to win any design awards. It's not that intuitive to use. I find the tools to be all over the place, and it's kind of hard to find what you're looking for. So this one's made by Jimmy McIntyre. And then finally we have the Zone System Express. This one looks very elegant. You have these 3 panels, and these actually only change this upper portion. So if I click on color and effects, you can see only this area changes. So these are all based on Blake Rudis's workflow system. So he has this workflow of working through tone, color, and effects, and then he has these workflow tools down here that are separate. And he has a very specific way of editing images that work with his workflow. And this panel looks very nice. It's pleasing to the eye. I like the way these color buttons look and the tones, everything. It looks really beautiful and it's intuitive to use. So now I'd like to talk about just what each of these panels are meant to do and what kind of workflow you're expected to do with them. So the TK panel, very dependent on creating super refined luminosity masks. You have ultimate power in creating exactly what you want, and these masks are created on top of like a curves adjustment layer, other color adjustment tools, or burning and dodging. So it's really meant to create a super fine selection, and it works fantastic for that. It is the best tool out there for creating incredibly precise luminosity mask selections. It does not have anything automated for blending images or anything like that. Now the ADP panel is very similar in the thought process of the TK panel. And this is by creating luminosity masks, selecting by zones, creating color masks, and then creating these adjustment layers and doing things like burning and dodging through these luminosity masks and then putting them into a group so you can put those into specific areas. It's got really powerful tools and I like it a lot. So these two panels I think are the best for advanced landscape photographers who really want to get the most control out from their images. Now, Lumenzia is very powerful and it's actually very similar to the ADP panel and the way it creates its luminosity masks. And I'll show you more how each of these function, but just to give you an idea, it's extremely similar to the ADP, but it definitely has less functions than ADP, and which lends to its simplicity, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you're definitely going to miss out on some of the tools that you have with ADP or TK. This panel, I think, is more intended for kind of the intermediate photographer who wants to get into luminosity masks, but doesn't want to go crazy deep into TK or ADP because they really do require some commitment, and you have to really know what you want to do to your image in a very specific way. So ADP and TK allow you to do very local adjustments that are very specific. Lumenzia does allow you to do those things and get very specific adjustments. So it's a very powerful tool, and it does have some small downfalls. I'd say it's great for the majority of photographers out there who want to just dive into luminosity masks and get a little bit better understanding of it and be able to just apply some of the techniques really quickly and easily without having to learn too much. Now, Rhea Pro, this is one of the least advanced as far as luminosity masks go, in my opinion. There's some really big downfalls, and I think it's kind of falling behind these other masks in the way it creates and refines masks. I just don't feel like it's kept up with the times. Now that said, I don't think the panel was really meant to keep up with these other ones. Its main purpose is more about blending in a specific way that Jimmy McIntyre has come up with. So if you're looking for something to help you automatically exposure blend, then I think Rhea Pro is great for that if you apply Jimmy's really specific method of doing this. I personally don't like it because I think it creates flat shadows. It's kind of an HDR-ish look in some ways, and I prefer to manually blend to get full control. But if you want to simplify your blending, then I think Rhea Pro is potentially a good option for you. Now, Zone System Express is something totally different. It's so far different that it almost shouldn't be included in here. Even though at first blush it kind of looks like it might belong, it's very different. It's not even using luminosity masks. It's actually using Blend F for everything, which is great. Blend F works awesome. But it's set up to be used with Blake's very, very specific workflow. And although it has some really cool tools, I just don't think it is in the same category as these. I still want to go over it because it comes up when people are looking for comparisons of the different luminosity masks. Even though this one isn't really using luminosity masks, people think it does. So I'm just going to go over it so you can see how it compares to these. So I've created this spreadsheet to show all the differences between the different panels because I was having trouble keeping track of what was different between them all. So I'm going to start with the price. So we got the TK panel 35, ADP same, Lumenzia about the same. Ray is a little bit more, and then Zone System Express is astronomically higher at 167. So most of these are very good value. It's kind of ridiculous how cheap they are, really. So I want to cover what kind of training all these panels have, because it's super important to actually know how to use them. Without this information, having really good training, you're not going to know what to do. So the TK panel does have a few free videos, although these are mainly just covering what's new in the version 5 panel. So as you can see, there's a few videos here with new features, and it does show some of the things of new advances in the new panel, but it's not going to get you in depth. It's really just to sell it, basically. So I wouldn't count on these to learn. All of Tony's videos are done by Sean Bagshaw, who does an excellent job, but the free videos are not going to get there. You're going to have to pay for the series. Then next up we have the ADP panel does have a number of free videos, and you can find those on his website by going to Luminosity Masks and how to use the ADP panel. And there's enough here to really get you on a good start. There's a lot of videos in here, and Aaron is a really good teacher. He's a little bit slow, and you have to be kind of patient with him. I found actually downloading the videos and speeding it up helps, but overall, really good information. He's got a really good process, and I'm super happy with the videos that I've seen from him. Now with Lumenzia, Greg Benz has his own YouTube channel, and this is really all he has right now is some of the free videos that shows the basic functionality of Lumenzia. He doesn't even have any advanced tutorials right now. So basically what you see on his YouTube channel is what you get at this point. I believe he is talking about creating some advanced workflow videos. But right now, there's not a ton of information out there on Lumenzia besides what he has on this YouTube channel. But what he has on here is really good. It's just that you're going to have to be able to soak up a little bit of information that it gives you and apply it in other ways. And then with Rhea Pro, Jimmy has a ton of YouTube videos that are free that will help get you started. He has lots of really good information on Photoshop, so he's a great resource even if you don't use the panel. There's a lot of good information you can get from him. I don't know if the basic videos will be enough to get you really running with Rhea, but it's definitely a good starting point and help you decide if you want to move farther and get his more advanced videos. Now the Zone System, he only has one free video, and it's basically just trying to sell the bundle, which is totally understandable. When you get the bundle, it comes with a ton of videos, and it's really great information, especially for people who are more new to post-processing and need to understand a lot of the fundamentals. But it goes into really advanced stuff that even I learned a few things from it. But in the videos, he actually doesn't cover the panel very much. It's a lot of information about post-processing and understanding the whys and hows behind it, but he doesn't show you much with the panel. And I think that's because, the panel's pretty simple. It doesn't do a whole lot. So there's really not much to cover, but the information otherwise is great. So as far as pricing goes, the videos with, if you get the bundle with the TK panel, $87. It's not bad. ADP panel, about the same, $80. Rhea's $70. Lumenzia, of course, doesn't even have any advanced tutorials right now. Zone System, again, just out of the park at $247. Is that worth it? I don't really know. If you want to have a really specific style that you're trying to achieve, I feel like the Zone System his style is trying to recreate like Instagram filters and kind of an HDR-ish look in ways. So it does have applications. It's just not exactly, it's not at all what I'm after. So you'll have to look at yourself and decide if that one's right for you. The quality of the videos, all of them are very good. The TK panel, again, done by Sean Bagshaw, is an excellent outdoor nature photographer, very experienced. He's been doing this for a very long time. He knows everything about the TK panels. He's helped develop them. So these videos are fantastic. The only negative I can say about these is that his videos that cover luminosity masking in real depth are based upon the version 4 of the TK panel, which, like I said before, is very different from the version 5 panel. So if you're new to luminosity masking, at this point it might be very hard to translate everything from what he teaches in the version 4 panel to version 5. If you've been using luminosity masks, especially the old version of the TK panel, this is going to translate very easily, and all you're going to need is the videos that cover the new features of version 5. I really think the TK panel is dedicated to those people that have been using it in the past. For new users, it's going to be very hard to grasp because it's built around a workflow of very advanced usage of luminosity masks. ADP panel videos are fantastic. I've watched all the advanced, I've watched all of his premium tutorials, which I must say are really, really good. He takes his time, explains things right, and he has a really good workflow, like I said before, that's very intuitive, very easy to use. I really like what Aaron has done here. Luminsia, the videos are very good, they just don't have a lot of depth to them. Rhea Pro, Jimmy's videos are great. He explains things very well, and there's lots of good information in them. Zone System Express, like I said before, the videos are fantastic, at least for covering the concepts behind what go into post-processing. So here you can see there's all these different things that he goes into, understanding tones and color theory, and color grading, and he gives you a whole workflow of how to process images. But again, he doesn't get into the panel very much. It doesn't show great real-world usage, at least from a landscape photographer's point of view who's trying to really create fine art. But if you're looking to recreate Instagram look or something along those lines, it looks more like a filter or something, then you have incredible power here, and it's really well explained, and I think this would be a great panel for you if you're looking for that type of style. So now I want to go over some of the basic functionalities of these panels, just to help you understand how they're supposed to work and the intended workflow. So I'll start with the TK panel, and I'll come down to the rapid mask. So you start by creating a composite channel, which is a composite of the red, green, and blue channels. So this is showing you your lights 1 mask. And from there you can further refine it to different lights or darks. So this light is only selecting this small area up here and some of the water down here. And then you can select your darks, midtones, etc. It's pretty simple in that regard. So if you start with the lights 1, you can then further refine it down here by doing auto levels to further enhance it. You can focus it, and then you can expand or contract the mask to select more or less, and then you can also infinitize it. So if I click on the infinity button, levels dialog comes up. I can refine my white and black points to really dial in this mask to exactly what I want to select. And then once you have your mask defined, then you go to adjust and create one of your adjustment layers, or you can create a selection. So I'll just create a curves layer. So now I have a basic curves layer with this luminosity mask attached, and then I can come in and brighten or darken this. So it gives me really fine control of exactly what I want to do. So there's a lot of power with this that the other panels don't have, because you can start with different selections. So the composite, like I said, is a composite of the RGB, but here you can actually start with one of the red, green, or blue channels. So you can quickly look through these to see which one is a better starting point that gives you better contrast between the colors, so you can figure out exactly what you want to select and then further refine it down here. So starting with a blue gives me a much more defined mask than if I was to start with composite. So that gives you a lot of power that you don't have with anything else. Now you can also start with different color channels, so you can start with the reds, or you can start with the blues. So now I can start with just the blue color, further refine that, or keep it on one, and then I can come in to my adjustment, say create a hue saturation, and now I have this adjustment layer with this layer mask attached, and I can adjust the saturation of just the blues really easily, but it's feathered so it doesn't have a negative effect. Now up here in the upper panel, this is basically just a bunch of Photoshop functions for the large part. So it just gives you really quick access to create new layers, merge layers, invert, create curves, levels, all your adjustment layers, and you can create burn and dodge layers here really quickly. You can flatten the image, bring up Adobe Camera Raw, you can set your black and white brushes, gray, open documents, etc. So a lot of power here to quickly get to your functions in Photoshop that is probably all you ever need. Now the ADP panel is fairly similar in the way it functions and is intended to be used as the TK panel. So with this we basically create our luminosity mask selection, and similar to the way the Tony's panel works, you can see a live preview of what you're going to get in black and white, but then you have these adjustment layers that you can further refine that mask with. So again, we have the levels just like we did with Tony's mask when we went to infinitize, so we can really dial in exactly the mask we want. And we have a curves, so we can actually come in here and pick on tones. So if I wanted to take some of this out, then I can just pick and drag, and it adds a point to my curve. And if I want to drag this one up, it'll further select that just by adding points here. And then finally, we have a black and white layer, which allows us to change specific colors. So if I want to select more of the blue, I can turn that up. If I want to select less of the yellow, I can turn that down or turn it up. So we have really good control over different aspects of the image. So then when you have your mask defined, you either load as a selection or as a curves layer. So in this case, I'll just load as a curves layer, and you can see these will go away, and then we'll be left with an adjustment layer with that luminosity mask attached to it. So now again, I can open this up and darken or brighten the same way we did in the TK panel. So very similar functionality there. And again, with the ADP panel, you can create selections based on the colors of our red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow, and a levels dialog will come up that allows you to further refine that red selection. And so now we have a selection loaded from that red selection we created there. So that's the real basics of how that panel works. It's really simple to use. It's fairly intuitive once you watch Aaron's videos. So next up is Lumenzia. This is going to look fairly similar to the way the ADP panel works. So if I click on the lights button, this is going to create a lights 1 mask. And just like Aaron's panel, we have levels, curves, and a color. So the same way that we were able to refine in ADP, we can do here in Lumenzia. So we can do the levels, we can do the curves, and we can pick on the areas that we want to take out or areas we want to add to. And then we can also come to the colors and further refine what we want to select using colors. Now I will say, using both these methods with ADP and Lumenzia, when you go too far with these, the selections do tend to get pixelated. So this one's not turned out too bad, but if you take them too far, just be aware that they will get a little pixelated and you might have some artifacts. But in general, they work very well as long as you don't go too far with them. So once I have that selection refined, then I can either load it as selection, a curve, level, HSL, solid color, or selective color. So I'll go again, just add this as curve. The same way, it gets rid of all those and creates a adjustment layer where I can refine that specific selection. So the panel is really intuitive the way it's laid out. It makes a lot of sense on how you make selections. You can select zones, and then really simple ways of creating adjustments. And you can also start with colors, but this is a little different because you have it up here. So if I want to select my blues, I click on this, and then if I want to select my light blues, I click the lights 1, and only lights are selected. When you load up that blue channel, then you still have your levels and your colors. You can still further refine this and really get those specific blues that you want to target. So from here I could create, say, a solid color, but now I can apply, say, a blue color to this, make it a little bit lighter, and then this will only be applied to that selection. And I can lower the opacity of this, and it gets you really quick results besides the waiting for the processor to catch up. But I think it's very functional. It makes a lot of sense. Really easy to use. I say it's one of the best options for someone who's new to luminosity masks. I think it makes a lot of sense. Although I really wish there was some more advanced videos showing you how to use this in a process, because the videos that are there only show you really how to use the tool, but it's not part of a full process like Sean Bagshaw's video are for the TK panel and like Aaron's are for the ADP panel. So although the panel is more functional for a beginner, the videos don't quite back it up. So it's hard choice between those. Now the Rhea Pro panel, a little bit different functionally. This one still relies on creating channels. So you start in the luminosity mask area, and you have to first create your channels to have this function correctly. So if you want to affect your brights, you need to create your brights masks first, and this is going to create channels in the background. And then you can come in and select these different channels, which is just going to load a selection and not give you a preview. You can come down here and turn on preview overlay, which you can see this kind of reddish color up here. It's not the best functionally, so now if I change it, preview doesn't change. So I have to come in here, turn it off, turn it back on. Now you see those lights. If I go select lights 5, doesn't change. So let me turn that preview off, turn it back on. Okay, now turn that off. Let me go back to a Brights 2. You can click on See Mask, and this gives me something I'm a little more used to with the other panels. But now if I go to Brights 1, it doesn't update. Still got to turn it off, turn it back on. So it's definitely not as functional as using the other panels. So again, if I select a Brights 1 and then come to Manual Adjust, this will bring up the familiar levels dialog with your luminosity masks. So you can refine it still the same way that you can with the other panels. But as you can see, that's really where it stops. You don't have any refinement with colors or curves or anything, so this is the best you get. Then comes the question of, what do I do with the selection? You actually have to apply it to something, but there's nothing here that lets me know what to apply it to. So you'd have to come in and say if I wanted to create a curves layer, I'd have to come in and manually create my curves layer. Now, of course, I still have the same functionality we had before, but it's not very intuitive. So there's a lot more to this panel, but I really want to show you the luminosity masking part because I think that's the most powerful part and what's the most important to me. So that's the real basics of it, and there's not much more to it. It's kind of going back into time to the original TK panels where you had to create the channels and then figure out what to do with them, and it's just not very intuitive. So I'm not too excited about this panel for luminosity masking. Like I said, it has a lot of other functions to help you blend images, but that's not really what I want to focus on here. So not impressed at this point. All right, the zone system, like I said, this is not even luminosity masking. So he has these different zones and expanded zones. So if I wanted to, say, select my lights, I could create this zone 9 and 10, and this is going to create a mask with this luminosity mask attached to it, even though it's kind of a luminosity mask, but it's really just a selection that's been feathered. So now I have this curves layer that I can make an adjustment to. So if I want to darken that area up there, you can see how that works. Doesn't really work that great. If I want to target a specific zone, basically what he wants you to do is create all of these zone masks and then play around with them to basically find out what is going to work for you. Okay, so now it's not quite done. We have all these different zone adjustment layers that are attached to levels. Okay, so now these have been grouped, and if you expand that group, so now I can come in here and play with these different zones. So if I play with zone 2 and 3, basically what he tells you to do is bring up your black and white points to refine these. And I haven't had the best of luck with these. I don't get the results that I like for landscape photos. You know, what he's using them for is totally different from what I am, so I don't really like the results. You know, the other thing with this, you know, it has this mask attached to it, which is not a very refined luminosity mask. It's created in a different way, and then it's feathered, so it's, in my opinion, not the best way of creating things. And then it also has a blend diff attached to it. So if you're not familiar with blend diff, it's this bar down here in your layer styles. And basically it's telling it to not apply this adjustment to the very darkest areas of the image and feather it into this area, and then not apply it to most of your lights. So this area, this adjustment's not being applied to, and then it's feathered into these midtones. That's how he's getting to a selection that's only affecting certain tones. So again, if I go to zone 7 and 8 and I pull these points in, you can see how it darkens those lights, or you can brighten them, and you can adjust the curve to add more contrast. And so, like I said, this is not true luminosity masking, and it's not created the same way that the other ones are. I really don't think it's fair to put this in with these other panels. I cannot say that this is a bad tool. I just can say it's a very different tool. It's not intended for an advanced landscape photographer, which is really what I'm trying to look at here. But for those of you creating more HDR looking things, like Instagram filter looks, then this is a great tool. And you're just going to have to look over the materials he has on his site to see if it looks like a good fit for you. Personally, I don't like it, but I do see where it could be applied for certain styles, and the training materials are very good. So I'm not bashing it, I just don't think it would work for landscape photography for the most part. Alright, so coming back to the spreadsheet to compare these, is the panel good for beginners? TK panel, I can't say it is. If I switch back to Photoshop, I can see I pulled up the intro panel that Tody includes. So this is very similar to the rapid mask, but it's just simplified a little bit. I still don't feel it's great for beginners. It's not the most intuitive because you have to create this luminosity lock first, and then you have to come in here in your channels and then infinitize them. And it's, I don't know, it's decent, but for a newbie, I think it would be really hard to grasp, especially with the videos that cover an older panel. So the ADP panel, yeah, I think it's great for beginners, especially with the training materials. It's just great all around. Luminosity, yes, it's very simple, very intuitive. The videos aren't fantastic, but I think you can get into them and be off and running fairly quickly. Rhea Pro, it's somewhat good for beginners. Again, for easily exposure blending, then I guess it makes that process easier for the newbie. But for actual luminosity masking, for someone who wants to get into more of that, to get more fine control of your images, then I don't think it's very intuitive at all. So that's why I say somewhat on that one. Zone system, yeah, it's good for beginners. The videos are great, the panel's intuitive, but again, it's not for what we're looking at here. Creation of channels. So a good example of this is what I showed in the Rhea Pro. It creates all the channels individually, it bloats your file size, and it's a very old method of creating luminosity masks. So in the TK panel, it only creates 2 channels. So if I create the composite image and I look in the channels panel, you can see it's created a channel called Lumlock and one called Rapid Mask. So the Lumlock's going to stay the same, and when I go through these various selections, it's going to change the Rapid Mask. So you only get these 2 channels, and then once you apply it, say to a selection, these will stay here, and you will have to delete those when you're done, but he's got a button here, just get rid of those real quick. It's not the best. He kind of moved backwards in a sense from the TK4 panel, because in that one it didn't create channels, it automatically got rid of them at the end, but it allowed them to create selections much faster, and it's I don't know, it works very well, and you only end up with 2 channels, so it's a little bit of a trade-off for speed and functionality, but I think he's done a pretty good job with keeping that at least the channels minimized. With Lumenzia and the ADP panel, these do not create channels. So if I click on the lights one and let it run through all of its process, then you can see no channels were created. So somehow in the background it's creating this luminosity masks and then allowing you to modify it through these adjustment layers, which is not as refined as Tony's panel, but for most applications it works very well, and you don't end up with the extra channels. So that'll help keep your file size to a minimum. And then Zone System Express, again, it's not luminosity mask based, so it's not even applicable. Live preview. So TK panel, yeah, we get that black and white mask, just like ADP and Lumenzia. And Rhea Pro, like I was showing you before, you do not get that live preview. You have to turn it on and off, and it's really slow and painful. In the Zone system, you don't get any of that live preview either. Zones. So in the TK panel, again, you have to start by creating your composite or basing it off one of these red, green, blue channels. And then you have this whole area of zones down here. So I can select zone 4, or I can select zone 9 to get my highlights. And that'll be very targeted to this area. And then he's got these in between, which are supposed to be like keys on a keyboard, apparently. So that you could be in between, so like an 8.5. So if I really want to target this area up here, so this might be a zone 7, and then I can come in and further refine this or just create my adjustment layer. So real simple to create zones. They are perfectly feathered. They are beautiful, perfect masks that you will not see any pixelation or anything on. And then with ADP and Lumenzia, you do have zones in ADP, so you have restricted and expanded zones. So restricted is going to be very specific, kind of like the TK panel, but if I select, say, zone 8, now you can see it's created a similar selection, but if I zoom in on this, you can see it's not quite as refined as the TK panel, but it still does a very good job. And then you can also work with expanded masks, which will feather it out further into other tones. So you can see how that kind of expands out and gives you a greater selection. If I select zone 9, selecting a narrow range of my highlights. And again, with that loaded, you can just create a curves layer from that. Same concept. Now Lumenzia, pretty much the exact same thing. You have these zones down here. So I can select zone 8. And you can see it's created a fairly good selection. It's, again, not as perfect as the TK panel, but it does a very good job. Same thing, create a curves layer. Now in Rhea Pro, no zones. So moving on. The zone system does have zones, of course. It's called zone system. But like I showed you before, it's very different in the way it functions. So the layer mask is created and it is feathered out, and it creates a fairly decent selection. Next up, adjust masks with color sliders. So I've already showed you how to do that in ADP and Lumenzia using the black and white color sliders. So that's what I'm referring to there, and none of the other panels can achieve this. So there's definitely an advantage to both of these because of that function. They do get a little bit pixelated when you make those extreme adjustments if you're trying to get something really refined. Sometimes it might work better to create it in different ways in the TK panel, but for most people this is going to work very well. So I do like that function a lot. So 16-bit masks I included in here. They all do 16-bit masks now, except for Zone System, which is based on BlendF instead. But that's, as far as I understand, totally 16-bit and fully functional. So yes, they all create 16-bit masks now, even though from what I've read, it's not that big of a deal, because the adjustments you're making, even if it was an 8-bit mask, it has to be a really extreme adjustment to see any banding or anything. And if you're making that big of adjustment, then you probably shouldn't be doing it anyway. A color mask can you create based upon color? Like I showed you before, yes you can in the TK panel. You've got these red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow masks that you can start with and then further refine from there. ADP, yes, you can create same things here. I would say they're a little bit more limited just because of the functionality of the panel. You can only output it to a selection. So it's not as functional as a TK, but it's not bad. Lumenzia, again, you have the functions up here, and again, it's really designed well. I like how the background changes to show you that you're creating a green selection, and so it's very intuitive to know that, okay, I'm targeting green, and I'm going to target lights 2 in my greens, and then create a selection based upon that. So very intuitive, works very well. Raya Pro, no, can't do that. Zone system, yeah, you can create a color selection. So this is selecting my greens, and you can see it's kind of a funky feathered selection. And then I can come into my curve and either adjust the luminosity of that, or if I come into my red, green, and blue channels, say if I go to my greens and bump up those greens, it's really easy way to do it, and I can further refine with my blue if there's any effect there, and come into my red channel, play around with that. So you can have a lot of control there, but because of the way it is created, it doesn't really target it specifically. It feathers it out, but it does a pretty good job. So you can see did a pretty good job of targeting just those greens. And again, it has a blend F attached to it so that it is not affecting the very darkest and not the very lightest, and then it's feathered into the midtones. So it works fairly well for that. Next up, compact history. What does that mean? So if you look at your history panel when you were creating these adjustments, so what I'm talking about is how many history states it creates when you apply one of these functions. So in TK panel, if I create my composite, you can see it creates my Lumlock composite, and then if I select lights 2, yeah, it's just one thing for each button I push. So if I auto levels this, focus it, it's just one thing for each button, and then I infinitize, change that so it's infinitized, and then if I go to curves, now it's created that curves layer. So simple, it makes sense, really easy to understand what you've done, and it's not this huge list. So if I come into ADP panel, create my lights, you see it's just created that lights mask, and now if I select a zone 8, then it's just create that restricted 8 mask, and I can come in, adjust my levels, so it adds a step for that. And if I change my curve, then it's going to add a modify curves, black and white, it's going to add that one. And then if I create a curves layer, now you got that tonal zone curves. So again, real simple, clean, makes sense. Lumenzia, same thing. If I create lights 1, it says L mask. If I create zone 7, it says Z7 mask. Makes sense. Create a curves layer. Real simple. They all work the same. Now, Raya Pro, first we have to create our brights, luminosity masks. Oh, and look at all this. Just by clicking one button, we have a huge history state. Now, if I select my brights 1, okay, it loads that selection, load selection. Yeah, so each button I push, it's loading a new selection, and I go in and create my curves layer. So it's this huge history state because it's not combining those all down into one function. It's showing you everything that's done, and it does that with everything in this panel. So you end up with this massive history state, and it's really hard to make sense of. Zone system, if I select a zone, you can see it runs through them and leaves everything behind. So similar to the way Raya works, it's not compacting those. So it's not that big of a deal functionally, but it does help when you're going back through your history states and trying to figure out what to get back to. This stuff doesn't make sense, because if I now go, so I accidentally clicked on the button that creates the full zone system, which took forever to run through, and now I have this history state that you can see is huge and makes no sense. So if I wanted to come back to the last point I was at, I have no idea where that is. So you can see how this gets really confusing, and it's hard to step back when you make a mistake. So that's a perfect example of why history states need to be compact. So next up, zone picker. In the TK panel, you do have the option to pick a zone, but what this is doing is actually just selecting a zone for you. So the color picker comes up, and if I pick on this tone, hit OK. And then if I look at my history, you can see it picked zone 6.5. So the pick tool does work well. It just picks one specific zone, so it's not really using the information to create a zone based upon that. It's just using the information to select the right zone for you. So it works fairly well. Now the ADP and Lumenzia work exactly the same. They have a narrow and wide function. So if I get back to my image here, and I'll go to the ADP panel first. Now over here you have two buttons to pick a restricted or a expanded tonal range. So restricted, if I pick in here, again, the picker comes up, and just hit OK. So now it's created that restricted zone based upon that, which is a pretty good selection, and I can still further refine it with these adjustment layers down here. So let's cancel that. Now I can select the expanded zone, so pick that and hit OK. And you can see it's selected a wider range of tones as a starting point. I can still adjust these. Cancel, and Lumenzia is exactly the same, except it's two buttons over here. This is narrow, this is wide. Works exactly the same way. Rea Pro, no zone picker. Zone system, no zone picker. Now BlendIf is a very specific functionality that it's a very powerful tool. Is it necessary to use with luminosity masks? I don't know. It can be handy to know how to use it, but if you should use it in your workflow or not is very subjective, and I, for a large part, don't like it because it's not visual for the most part. So TK Panel does not use BlendIf, ADP does not, Lumenzia does. If I click on the mode button where it says normal and switch to if under. So with BlendIf you need something to start with, so I will create a curves layer and I'll just make a basic adjustment to brighten that up, and then I can click lights 3 and you can see the BlendIf was applied to the lights 3. And so if I double click on this icon for the BlendIf or for the layer style, then you can see my BlendIf has been applied so that the adjustment is not applied to all my darks, but only to my lights 3, which would be this zone here. So it can be a bit confusing to understand what's going on behind the scenes, but if I click through these, you can see it changes in this case it's a very visual fashion because it's automatically applying them. And you can also turn on the visualization for this if you hit the if button. So this puts a green overlay on what's on the BlendIf. So if I change this to lights, you can see it's applying to most of the image. Lights 2, a little bit less. So that works fairly well to be able to visualize. It's not quite as good as I like with the luminosity masks. And you can still come in and refine this, but not the same way you can with the other ones. So if I come back into my layer styles, I can still change this mask. So if I want to restrict it farther restrict the lights farther, I can make this adjustment so I can target exactly what I want. And having that preview really helps to see what that is. And if I want to take it out of some of the lights, I can pull this back so it's targeting a specific zone. And then if you alt click on this arrow, you can split this and that will feather that selection out. So move this out, alt click to split it, to feather it out. So there's a lot of power with BlendIf. I think it's a great tool. It works very similar to the way luminosity masks do. It's just a different way of going about it. So you'll have to play with each and see which one works best for you, which is most intuitive. I think for the most part this won't be intuitive for people because BlendIf is pretty hard to understand. So I think it's more for the advanced user. Rea Pro does not have BlendIf, and like I said before, Zone System is based completely on BlendIf. So you definitely will have to get an understanding of BlendIf if you're going to use the Zone System panel. Next up is saturation masks. So this is creating luminosity masks based upon the saturation of the image. So in the TK panel, if I click on the saturation button, this is going to create luminosity masks based upon the most saturated areas of the image. So everything that's white is highly saturated, everything black is less saturated. So if I were to create, say, a hue saturation adjustment layer with that mask attached, then I can reduce the saturation of just the most saturated parts of the image. So that gives you a lot of power. And if you create the saturation and then use the dark tones, these are actually the least saturated parts of the image. So you'll see be an invert of that. And you can further refine this down to select just the least saturated parts and then create a hue saturation, and you can bring up the saturation of the areas that are undersaturated. So that gives you a lot of power to create selections based on saturation. Then in ADP, you do have some basic functionality of this. If you click on the saturation button down here, it's going to run through and create a single adjustment layer with the most saturated color selected. So here's the mask, and you can make your adjustment just like with the TK panel. It doesn't give you quite the flexibility that the TK panel does. You could still come in and adjust this by control clicking to select it and then click show adjust to bring up the levels dialog and further refine how much of that you want selected. And then once you have that selection, you would just click remask. So it's not quite as intuitive as the TK panel, but the functionality is there. Then in Lumenzia, pretty much the same thing. So you create this saturation mask, but you do have the same controls that you do with the rest of the masks. At least you have control over the levels and curves. So you can refine this beforehand, unlike the ADP panel. So I can refine this before I create something. So now I can create an HSL and be able to change the saturation of those least saturated layers. And vibrance is for those most saturated colors. And the vibrance button is for creating those that are undersaturated. So similar to the way you select the dark ones in the TK panel, here you can just select vibrance, so you can create a saturation layer to bring up the vibrance. Raya Pro and Zone System do not have this functionality. So next up is called mask-to-mask group creation. So this is a very powerful tool to allow you to target your adjustments to a specific area of the image that you can paint in. So in the TK panel it's very limited, but it is functional. So if I, for example, if I was to create just a basic lights one and create a curves layer, and I just increase the brightness of that, but you can see it applies to the entire image. If I wanted to target this to specific areas, then I can add this to a group. And if I paint black in this, I can take it out of certain areas of the image. Or if I was to invert this mask, then I can just paint in white where I want this adjustment to be applied. So you can see I can just paint it in where I want it because it's controlled through this mask that is part of this group with this curve. So it's a very powerful way of targeting your adjustments to only certain areas of the image. Now similarly in the ADP panel, if I create a light selection and then create a curves layer and just brighten that up some. Now if I want to just apply that to certain areas of the image, I have a few different options to do this. So the first one is going to be similar to what I just did. If I click on paint, then it creates a group with a black mask already attached to it. So that way, and my brush is set to white already. So then I can just paint that in just like I did with the TK panel, but it's a much faster process. I don't have to invert the mask or select my brush color. I'm just ready to go. Do that and show the other options. So I can do it by selection. If I select my lasso tool, I can make a quick selection around this area. And now if I click selection, it's going to apply it directly to that selection without any feathering or anything. It's very harsh. But that could be good in some situations if you created a better selection. I can create a new selection, and then I can select on the feather button. And this, if I zoom out, you can see it allows me to feather this selection as much as I like. So now I've refined that to be only applied to that area. That's feathered out because I feathered this layer mask. And then if I want to combine these to keep my file size down, I can click apply, and that will merge those into one layer mask that has the luminosity applied to just that feathered area. So it's a pretty cool tool. Works very well. I wish the TK panel had something more like this. And then in Lumenzia, so it's going to be similar. I'll create the lights 1, create a curve, and just brighten this up. And now I can add this to a group. Now it's going to create it the same way that the TK panel does with a white. But if I undo that, see if I hover over this, it says hold Alt to use an inverted mask. So if I Alt click this, now I'm going to get an inverted mask, and I can come to my brush tool and just start painting white. Same way we did before. So let me undo that. Now if I create a selection beforehand, so again, I'll click the lasso tool and just make a selection. Now if I click group, it knows I have a selection active, so it's going to ask me, do I want to feather the mask, do not feather it, or just do not use that selection. So I'm going to feather it. Now it doesn't give me an option of how much I want to feather it, it's just going to be automatically applied, but you can see it does a pretty good job of feathering that out. So it's only applied to that area. And then if I'm happy with that, I can combine the group and the adjustment layer just like in ADP. Raya Pro and Zone System, again, do not have this functionality. You'd have to do it manually, which isn't that terribly hard, but it's nice to be able to automate that where you can. So next up, we got the Orton lights. So this is what adds glow to your highlights. So the TK panel does have an option for this, and it works very well. It's a little bit different than it used to be. So if I come to the Actions tab, and this is under Orton Effect, so just click that, and then the amount of blur, we'll just leave that as the default. And now it's being applied to the entire image, which is not what we want. It's a little bit different than the way the old panel works, which applied it to just the lights. So I think Tony wanted to give us more control over where we apply that to exactly. So you can turn on the auto apply and create a composite, and now that's going to replace my mask with a darks or a lights one. So now it's just being applied to the lighter areas of the image, and I can further refine it if I want to only apply it to, say, the lights 2. So then you only get that glow in just the light areas, which is what we want. We don't want that in the shadows. So it's very effective. You have some options to control the light image if you want to make it darker or brighter. And then in ADP, if we go to other tools, we've got Orton Effect here. And it functions very similar to the way the TK panel works. So you have a mask on this layer that is constraining it, but it doesn't do the best job of constraining it. Of course, you can reduce the opacity to something more reasonable, and then it's doing a pretty good job, but it's kind of adding the glow to the entire image, which we don't necessarily want. So to refine this mask, it takes a little more work. We'll have to come back to the masks and say we want to apply it to just the lights. Then you have to go through the process of creating the selection, make it as a selection, and then select this layer and remask. So now it will just be applied to the lights, but it doesn't quite work the same way. So and even if I remask this to have a mask that's just applying to the lights, it doesn't seem to work quite the same way that Tony's does. So you're kind of stuck with having this applied to the entire image, which might be okay for you if you like that look, but I like to have more control TK panel, so there is a little bit of negative on this one. I don't particularly like the way this one works. Lumenzia does not have the Orton lights. Raya Pro does. If you come to the Enhance tab and then Enhancements, you get different options for the Orton effect. So this first one, you apply the Gaussian blur just like the others, and then you can adjust your levels so you can target exactly where you want that adjustment to be applied. But then you're left with just a layer. So there's no refinements you can make other than just lowering the opacity, which it's already started at 30%, so it's a very hefty adjustment. And you can see it's applied to the overall image. And if you wanted to limit this to just the highlights, then you'd have to come back to Luminosity masks, create your bright masks, select brights 1, and then apply selection to this layer. So now it's being constrained to just the highlights. So it works okay. There's, of course, other options for, so this is the Orton Effect Bright. So it's making those highlights really bright, but it's still adding a glow to the entire image. Not exactly what I want to see. I want my Orton effect to be very subtle. So it's to each their own what they like, but I personally don't like this. And then you have a warm and cold effect. If you're not very familiar with how these tools are supposed to work, then this could be a very easy way to get something more unique, but I think they're a little bit too powerful. Now, Zone System Express does have something for this, but it is under the effects panel and it is called Radiance. So it gives you some instructions on what you're supposed to do, and you need to adjust your Gaussian blur, and then we can use the shadows highlights to refine what this mask looks like. So I can play around with the different tones and dial this in. So it's actually a pretty cool tool, and I can bring up or down the color. I can adjust my midtones and then just hit OK. And so now these are applied as smart filters to the smart object. And you can see it really made everything pop out nicely. And of course I can reduce the opacity on this because it's a bit much. But I do like the effect this creates for a large part. It really helps everything kind of pop out and give a really nice, smooth, clean look. So I do like the radiance filter in the zone system. So zone subtraction is the idea that you can create a luminosity mask and then subtract another zone from that mask to create a more refined mask. In the TK panel, we do not have that anymore. We used to kind of have it in the last panel, but it's kind of gone away. And I think it's because it's been superseded by these zones, which you can further refine. So I can take a zone 7 and then further refine that by contracting or expanding it. So if I want to expand this out and focus it a little bit more, we have ultimate control on where we can get to with this. So I think the zone subtraction has been kind of superseded by this. In the ADP panel, we do have subtraction masks. To be honest, I wasn't able to figure out how this works. I've tried different things and I just can't seem to figure out how it's supposed to work. So I can't really recommend that, but it's just because I don't know how it's supposed to work. Lumenzia does not have zone subtraction, but again, I think it's kind of less important with the way things work now. Rhea Pro does, and the zone system does not. And again, with Rhea Pro, I wasn't able to quite figure out how it's supposed to work. So it is a little bit confusing, and I can't really say if I can recommend it or not. I just know it's there. So range selection, in the TK panel, we cannot select a range of tones. This only exists in Lumenzia. So if I come over to Lumenzia, you can actually select a range of tones. So you want to select the darkest and the lightest that you want to select. So if I wanted to select, say, the tones in this area of the rock, so from here to here, select here and then hit OK, and then select here and hit OK. So now it's just select the range of tones in there. So that's a pretty powerful tool. It is a bit pixelated. I believe it's because I think it's using the color range tool, which is not the most refined tool, but it does give you a pretty cool option to make selections. I don't know if I would ever need it necessarily because I think there's better tools, but it does exist in Lumenzia. So saturation painting is a pretty cool thing that you can only find in the TK or the ADP panel. So if I switch over and go to, in the TK panel, you go to Paint, and all this does is create a new layer set to saturation blending mode and set your brush to gray and red. So if you paint gray, it's going to desaturate anywhere you paint. If you paint red, it's going to increase saturation. In ADP, same thing. Click on saturation painting, creates that saturated paint layer, changes the colors of the brush. That's it. Really simple. So it increases saturation, or if I switch to gray, decreases saturation. So when you combine that with luminosity mask and the saturation masks, etc., it's really powerful, and it's something you only find in these two panels. So vignette, yeah, all of these tools work very well to where you can create a selection, feather it, and then it's going to create basically a burn dodge layer with a feathered vignette. So in the TK panel, the vignette's very simple. It doesn't give you any control over how you want to apply it, other than how much you want to blur the vignette. So to create a softer one, just raise it up, and it'll just blur that out. So it's created a really simple vignette. It's just a layer set to the multiply blending mode. In ADP, we can actually create a selection beforehand if we want to limit that to a certain area. So it's just automatically going to use that selection and create a vignette. And this works a little differently. It's set to the luminosity blending mode, and the curve has just been pulled down a little bit, so you can further refine how much you want to change this. Which one is better is a matter of opinion. I think they both work very well, but I think ADP gives you a little more control over where you want to apply that. Lumenzia, you got the same thing. So if I want to create a selection, I can then go to the vignette tool, and it's going to ask me what I want to do, if I want to feather it or not feather it. Of course, I do want to feather this. So in this one, actually, the blending mode is set to normal, and it's just been, curve has been pulled down with a lower opacity, so then you can raise the opacity up, hide that, to increase it. Now this will change the colors because it's darkening with a normal blending mode. So if you wanted to not affect the colors, then you'd have to switch it to luminosity. So they all work fairly well. And with Raya Pro, we have a couple options for a light vignette or a big vignette. The vignette in this case is using a layer with a layer effect of gradient overlay. That's radial, and it's set to soft light. So it's a different approach to it. It works very well, but it doesn't give you quite as much control of where you want to apply it or not. The active selection indicator, this just tells you when you have a selection active. So in a lot of cases, if you're creating, say, a midtones mask, you might not actually have marching ants visible, so you don't know you have a selection active. So if I just create this selection, you can see there's no marching ants. So I don't really know that I have a selection active. In the TK panel, you can see these red lines above the panels. That just lets you know that you do have an active selection. In the ADP panel, expand this out a little, you can see this green dot here. That lets you know you have a selection active. And in Lumenzia, the select button is green, and that lets you, again, know that you have a selection active. In Raya and Zone System, they don't have this. Now, frequency separation is a pretty unique tool that allows you to adjust the colors and tones separately from the underlying detail of the image. So I'm not going to go too deep into this. The TK, ADP, and Raya all have this. Lumenzia and Zone System do not. It's a pretty powerful tool. Photoshop shortcuts, these are just the shortcuts you use for basic Photoshop functions. The TK panel has a ton of these. It's very well done. All of these functions up here are your basic Photoshop functions, and it's very quick and easy to get to them. I really like the way Tony's done this. Lumenzia has some very basic stuff, basically for creating a few different adjustment layers, but that's it. And then ADP panel, also pretty basic stuff, adjustment layers, not a ton of stuff, but there is some there. And then Raya Pro and Zone System also have a few basic ones, like Lumenzia does. There are some functions to clean chromatic aberration up. The TK panel has this now, and Raya Pro also has it, and the other ones do not. And that just allows you to clean up the chromatic aberration around the edges of high contrast areas. And I found the one in the TK panel to work better than the one in Raya Pro. So now we get into dodging and burning, and these all use a fairly similar method with just slightly different limitations. So in the TK panel, we have two dodge burn buttons here. So if I create a burn layer, it's simply creating a new layer set to the blending mode of soft light, and it sets my brush to black. So if I paint on this layer, it's going to darken it. Now if I create a dodge layer, simply create a new layer set to the blending mode of overlay, and it sets my brush to white. And so if I brush on that, it will lighten. So they're pretty effective, simple. In ADP, we have this dodge burn button down here, and it's going to bring up a dialog that asks me what I want to achieve. So if I want to create a dodge layer on simple transparent, and if I click all, that's going to create a similar thing to what we did in the TK panel. So it's going to create a new layer set to the blending mode of soft light, and it has a layer mask attached to it so we can further refine it. So this is kind of where it differs, is that you can, say, create a dodge layer that's transparent, but you can target it to lights. And then it brings up the levels dialog so we can refine which lights we want to affect. So now with this layer selected, if I paint white, it's only going to affect those light areas. So pretty powerful there. There's more ways to do it. You can do a curves layer. So if I select, say, a burn, that's set to the curves and targeted to just the lights. Again, levels dialog comes up so we can refine where we want that targeted to. And now we have a curves layer with that luminosity mask attached to it, but that's put in a folder with a inverted mask on it. So now if we paint white, it's going to burn, which is a little bit counterintuitive, the way we would typically do things, but you can see how that will darken up my light areas because I'm painting through this mask to reveal what's below on this curves layer, which is darkening. So some pretty powerful tools. You can achieve the same things in the TK panel though. So if I were to create a dodge layer and then I can, if I check auto apply, I can apply a lights mask to this, for example. So now when I burn, it's only going to affect those light areas. And I could still come back and refine this and select, say, a lights 4, and it's going to update that mask, so it's only being applied to that area. So you can achieve the exact same thing, but it's just a little more intuitive in ADP how you get there. But once you know how to do it in TK, then it functions just the same. So Lumenzia functions fairly similar to the way that the ADP panel does. So there's a button just called Dodge, which isn't terribly intuitive. It should be called Burn Dodge, but I recognize there's space limitations. And then it just asks you what method you want to use. So 50% gray is if you want to actually use the Burn Dodge tools in Photoshop. Transparent pixels if you want to paint black or white. And then curves with luminosity blend mode is similar to what we just saw with ADP. And high contrast is just setting it to a different blending mode. So soft light versus overlay. So I'll try creating the curves. So now this has created 2 different curves layers, so it's set up for dodge and burn. So now I can paint on this layer mask. So if I just brush in white onto this dodge layer, it'll lighten, and if I paint white onto this layer, it will darken. So it works a little bit differently, but still very functional. And if I were to create the transparent pixels, say high contrast, then that just creates a simple transparent layer set to the overlay blending mode. And I can paint black or white on this to dodge or burn. And of course, you could still apply a luminosity mask to this, but again, it's just not quite intuitive unless you know how and why to do that. And the Rhea Pro works similarly. You can create a gray layer that is simply a 50% gray set to soft light, like the other ones, real simple. Or you can choose highlights, which comes up with levels, so you can further refine it, and it is just a layer set to soft light with a layer mask attached to it, so it's only targeting highlights. Same thing with the shadows. And the zone system has a dodge and burn button, and he has it set up so you use the burn and dodge tools in Photoshop, which I personally don't like, but you can easily dodge and burn through this 50% gray layer set to overlay. So it's really limited. I don't like the way he's set this one up personally. And next up is web sharpening. So if you want to do for your final output to the web, the TK panel has a great tool for this. If we just come to the Actions tab, so you basically just set up your dimensions. You have options to make it extra sharp. It's really simple. Works really well. In the ADP panel, you have an option to save for web here. Basically, it's going to resize your image, and then you can sharpen it, convert to sRGB, and then save for web. So it's kind of a multi-step process that it works fairly well, but I don't like it as much as the TK panel. Lumenzia does not have web sharpening, nor does the zone system. Rhea Pro does. You just go by, say, height. Say we set it to 1200. And then you ask if you want to convert to RGB. It does a pretty good job of sharpening. And then you can do a save as a JPEG, although I prefer to use the save for web tool. But all 3 of those work fairly well. But I believe the TK panel works best for this. I personally use another extension for this, but I think the TK panel works very well. Detail and clarity. So the TK panel definitely does do this. I think it does it very well. So you can, now you just have a clarity button. It used to target lights, darks, or midtones. So you just adjust the radius to what you're trying to target, and then it'll add some clarity. But then you want to restrict this to certain areas. So if I want to restrict it to just my highlights, then of course I can make sure auto apply is checked and then just apply it to my lights. So now that clarity is just in my lights. And then I might do a separate one just for my darks and adjust that differently, and potentially one for my midtones as well. And ADP has what's called detail extractors. So if I want to limit it to my lights, I just click lights. And so now if I turn this on and off, you can see it's extracted some detail from the lights. And it does a pretty good job. I think the TK panel works a little bit better in this regard, but it's not a massive difference. And Lumenzia does not have this feature in the Rhea Pro. It is there, but it's very limited. So you have these options for detail enhance, and you just adjust how much of this high pass filter you want applied. So it's really simple. You don't have any adjustments once you've selected that high pass. So, you have to recreate it if you don't like the results. So it's not quite as intuitive and functional. Now for creating contrast in the image, there's various ways of doing this. With the TK panel, you can use what's called triple play. I'm not going to go into this real deep because it's pretty complex and it's really confusing to most people, and you'd have to go back to the old tutorials. This was in the version 3 of the TK panel. Now they brought it back in version 5. So if you've used it before, you know how to use it, but otherwise newbies are going to have a really hard time with this one. It does work very well, but it is pretty confusing. In the ADP panel, this is under the auto adjust section, so you can create these adjustments that work on sliders. So if I create the contrast masks, then it'll run through and create all these different adjustment layers, and you can adjust them with these sliders here. Of course, all it's doing is changing the opacity of the layer. So it's pretty simplistic, but it can be a good way for you to simply adjust your contrast. So now we have these sliders set to 0. So if I want to add some mid-tone contrast, I just slide this up and we'll get some mid-tone contrast. But all this is doing is there's a curve layer down here with the luminosity mask with the midtones, and it's got this S-curve applied to it. So it's pretty simplistic, but if you're new to all of this, this might be a really good way for you to get into it without having to know some really nitty-gritty details of how things work. So it can be fun to just play around with these sliders to get a result that you like pretty quickly. And Lumenzia has a different way of doing this. Basically, there's this contrast button, and what it allows you to do is just select an area and then apply contrast to just that local area. So it's just going to ask you if you want to feather the mask, and of course I will. And so now it's just going to create this curves layer with this curve applied to it, and then it's got this feathered mask on it. So you can see it's just applied some local contrast to that area. Again, if you're not real familiar with how everything works in Photoshop and getting into really advanced methods for increasing contrast, this can be a great way to just quickly make your images pop and draw attention to an area that you want to highlight. So it's a pretty cool tool. It's really simplistic once you know more advanced stuff in Photoshop, but for beginners, this is a great way to do local adjustments. And in Rhea Pro, you have this zone contrast. So now we have this folder with different zones in it. So you have your different midtones and shadows that you can adjust this curve. So it's pretty simple. You just add some contrast to each one the way you would, however you want it to. It's pretty basic. I mean, you can just go through and create these things on your own. So it's not really an advanced way of doing anything. I'm not really terribly impressed by this. Now, adding glow, this can be a really nice effect in certain images. The TK panel does have this. If you come under Actions and just go to Make It Glow, then it's going to give you the Gaussian blur. I'm just going to accept that. And then it's just added a glow to your image. It's really simplistic. It's not something I would really recommend using for the large part. It's one of the less developed tools in the TK panel. And then in the ADP panel, find this under Other Tools and the Soft Glow. This one is a lot more advanced and really gives you some good control, so I do like the way this one functions. So now we have this little glow that's been applied to the image. We still have controls down here with what we can, we can adjust this to brighten up the shadows a little bit. it works pretty well, and then we can adjust the amount by just adjusting the opacity. And so we can just add little glow to the image, and of course then with the group you could put a layer mask on this and target exactly where you want it. So it works good. It's a little more functional than TK. It's a very specific taste, and I wouldn't apply it to every image, but it is a good effect that you can't find in the other panels. Next up, dust spots. This one is really simple, but only a few of them have this feature. So in the TK panel, you can find it under the Actions tab, and then you just click on the plus minus dust. And this is just going to create a couple new layers, and you're going to get this black and white effect, so you can actually see the dust spots. And in this one, you can just barely see one right here, but you can come in here and adjust this levels layer so you can really dial it in and find those dust spots. Then once you find them, you go and select this heal clone layer, and I just like to use the spot healing brush and just come in, make this a little bit bigger, and click that. And now if I click the plus minus dust, it's going to take away those two adjustment layers and just leave me with my layer that has that corrected dust spot on it. Then you can either leave it like that or flatten it. Pretty simple, that's all there is to it. In the ADP panel, you can find this under other tools, and there's this little dust spot button down here. Just click on that, and it's going to do something very similar, but this one's in color. So again, you can come to this levels adjustment and dial that in so you can see those dust spots better. And it does a pretty decent job. You can see a couple here, and again, it's just a separate layer. Then I can just come in and click that. And it's a little less elegant than Tony's. If I click this button again, it's just going to create a new one. So what I have to do is just delete this adjustment layer, and now I'm left with the corrected image. Again, pretty simple. And finally, in Luminosity, you have a dust button down here. Just click that. It's going to create a bunch of adjustment layers, put those in a group. So now you're going to see this weird banding in the sky, and you can see those dust spots pop out really well. And if I expand this, he actually has different options for you to try. So if I uncheck this first one and go to the next one, he has a little bit different effects. So if they're not working, you can try different ones. There's not a whole lot of adjustment you can do with these if they don't show up, because all these are a curves layer that have these spikes in the curve. But by default, they seem to work really well. This one does not have a secondary layer to put the new dust spots on, so you actually have to do this on your background layer. It's kind of a destructive way of doing it, but it's not that big of a deal for dust spots, in my opinion. So then I would just come to my spot healing, click those, and then again I have to actually delete this group. So now they're corrected on my background layer, and I'm done. Next up, general sharpening. This is a feature that's unique to Luminosity. So in Luminosity, if you just click the sharp button, then the first thing you do is click this high pass. So it's just going to create a high pass sharpening layer, and you can adjust how much radius you want to apply to it. That just tells you how much sharpening to apply. And so you can see it does a pretty good job adding a little bit of sharpness, but it can add a halo around contrasty edges. So what he has in here, if you actually make a selection first, I'll just make it with the quick selection tool, just to select the sky. And then if you come back into sharp, then you can click on these protect edges via manual selection. And what that does is just look at this edge, and then it creates a mask. So if I alt click on this, you can see it created a mask along that edge so that those edges are not being sharpened with that tool. So it does a really good job of just getting rid of that halo. And that's really all there is to that one. So moving on to auto blending, this is the idea that you blend exposures together to create a higher dynamic range automatically, kind of like an HDR would work. The TK panel does not have this. You have to do everything manually, which I personally prefer, but the ADP panel does have this feature. So if I switch back over, with this you need to have your layers in the correct order. So you need to have your darkest layer on top and then down to your brightest. So I've got this one that's really low exposed for the light beam, and then I have these other two exposures to get all that dynamic range. So in the ADP panel, come to auto blend. It's going to allow you to select how many images you have. So I've got 3, and then you have different options. So if I select semi-auto, this is going to use luminosity masks, and then this levels dialog will come up, allowing you to select how much of that particular image you want pulled through. So you can adjust your levels to dial that in to something that looks natural. So that's going to apply that mask to that layer and then go on to the next one and create another mask. So I can blend in even more of this. And so I can just dial it in exactly where I want so that it looks real natural. And you see that does a pretty good job. Some of these shadows are still a little blocked up just because of the way it handled it. And I really don't have a whole lot of control on what I can do now because I just have these masks that I can come back and change, but not in a very useful way. So it works okay. Out of all the options you'll see here, I think this one works the best, but it still is not as good as hand blending yourself, in my opinion. So the other option in auto blend was using blend if. So if you hit execute on this, you can see I end up with a very tone compressed image that does not look very good. That's because it's using blend if on each of these layers to decide what to blend together, and you could come in here, double click on this, and change your blend if. So you can try to dial these into something that looks more natural, but I haven't had much luck with that. I don't think it works very well, so I don't really recommend that. On some images it might work okay, but definitely not on this one. And then in Rhea Pro, there's a couple different ways to do this. You have a blend if option. So if I turn off this top layer and I want to blend this one in, I can use the blend if, and because this exposure is darker, I'll click the dark, and it's just going to pull some of that detail in, and then you can reduce the opacity to try to make it look more natural. And then if I turn on this layer, do the same thing, and set that to dark, then I can really, again, lower this opacity and try to create something that looks natural. And it does a pretty good job. You will see some tone compression in some areas. You'll lose some of your nice highlights up in here. So if I look at this base exposure, you can see I have these really nice, beautiful highlights in this area. But when I turn these back on, you can see how this just kind of goes flat. So I don't really like this method or any of these methods because of that. And then next up is the apply image. So with this one, it will actually create a luminosity mask. And so I can select dark 1, 2, or 3. That's just how much of the tonal range you select. So this one is very wide and this one is very narrow. So if I start with the wide one, see again it achieves the same thing. You can lower the opacity, dial that in something more natural, turn this one on, and do a dark, let's say a dark 2. And then again you can lower the opacity of this layer to make it look more natural, because you can see you get really bad tone compression in the really bright areas. I just dial this down. And this does a little bit better job than the blend if. You get a little less of the tone compression. So if I turn these off, you can see I retained most of these highlights. And you can achieve these exact same things using the other panels. So if I do this in the TK panel, I can just come to the rapid mask and turn on auto apply, and then I can select some different lights to create different effects. And with that top layer on, I can select that layer and then select, say, just my brightest lights, my lights 4. And if that doesn't work, then I can expand that further, or if I need to contract it. And if it's creating too much tone compression, then just lower the opacity of the layer and until it looks like it's something more natural. So you can see you can achieve the exact same thing, and you actually have more control using the TK panel using this method. It's just you have to know how to do it. There's just no automated way to do it in the TK panel, which again is better for advanced users. You have a lot more control. The Rhea Pro, you have less options, but that might be good for a beginner. And the video tutorials regarding this are much more in depth. There's actually, I don't think there's any video tutorials covering how to do this HDR like blending using luminosity masks in this way, besides what Jimmy has on Rhea Pro. Even with the ADP panel, I didn't see any tutorials that covers how to auto blend these images. I simply had to come in here and look at the information that he has built into the panel, which is fairly basic, and if you're new to this, it may be really hard to understand. So I think this is one area where Jimmy gets the nod for the Rhea Pro panel, is the auto blending. Primarily because there's so much information he has on all of his videos online. Otherwise, I think the TK panel has more power. Okay, we're getting in the home stretch here. Auto adjust, this is something that is specific to the ADP panel, and you can find this under the auto adjust panel. So he has all these sliders, and you first have to create these adjustment layers by selecting these buttons. So let's say I wanted to add some mid-tone contrast. So I just click on the contrast layer. It takes a very long time to run through this and create all of these adjustment layers. I sped through it because this video is getting ridiculously long the way it is. But if I wanted to add some mid-tone contrast, then I can just bring this slider up and you can see how it affects the image in real time. And all this is doing is changing the opacity of this mid-tone contrast curves layer. So if I select this layer, you can see it's just changing this opacity, and this just has a mid-tone luminosity mask applied to it with this S-curve. So it's simple. It works well. If you're not an advanced user, you don't know exactly what you want to achieve, this can be a great way to do it. If you just want to darken up your bright lights, you can just quickly be able to slide this and change it quickly without having to know how to create the luminosity mask and everything. So it's a good tool for beginners. I would not use this personally because it's pretty slow and I want to target it and adjust everything myself. But it can be a good tool for beginners. And finally, the gradient. This is specific to ADP, and you can find this at the top of the ADP panel. So if I just turn this on and then select one of my luminosity masks, so if I select my dark, then it's going to expand my image and add this gradient down at the bottom that shows what's being selected. So the whites are what's being selected in the darks. So if I change this to, say, midtones 2, now you can see just these midtones are being selected. Again, it can be useful for beginners to help them understand exactly what's being selected. I personally would not use this, but for those starting out, it can be a good tool. All right, so to wrap things up and my conclusions, I personally feel that the TK panel is the best panel out there. This is just my opinion, but I really feel it is the most powerful. It's the fastest. The training materials are really good, but can be a bit confusing because of the different versions of the panels. Sean Bagshaw does phenomenal work on his videos, so I highly recommend that if you're going to go this direction. But it's not for the faint of heart. It is a very complex panel. Once you understand it, it's really simple and quick, but for the newbie, it might be hard to grasp. There's a lot of moving parts, and you have to really understand the fundamentals behind luminosity masks. So if you come from the days when you were creating your own luminosity masks, this is definitely the panel for you. You need this panel. It's so much more powerful than just creating them on your own. And having that base knowledge really will help you jump in with both feet in this panel. So it's phenomenal. I love it. I use it all the time on my images. Even though I've learned all these other panels, I still come back to the TK panel every time. Now, the ADP Pro panel. This is a really good panel. I really like it. The training materials are awesome. The videos are so good. There's so much information packed into these, and they're not confusing because it's all based upon this panel. It looks the same. Everything works the same. So it's a great way to learn luminosity masks. And I think it's really powerful. It has probably the most tools. It kind of combines all the other tools into this one panel. So there's only a few that are missing, but for the most part, this is a really complete panel. It's a little bit slow, would probably be my biggest complaint. So for the beginner, I think this is a great panel, and I would highly recommend it, especially with all the great training materials. You can't lose with this panel. I really like it. And there are some tools I actually come back to that I can't find in the TK panel at times. So I find this useful to have along with the TK panel, which may sound kind of crazy, but there are some tools that I like in this. Lumenzia is a great, simple panel. I really feel like this is just a phenomenal tool for the beginner, especially. It's got a lot of power. It's just so intuitive to use, and it's such a clean design. I really want to recommend this panel because I think it's great, and it's really closely hand in hand with the ADP panel. I think they're both very powerful tools, and I have a hard time recommending between the two, but I have to give the nod to the ADP panel because of the training materials. Lumenzia is kind of severely lacking in that area. He has some very basic tutorials, That'll get you started, but it's not going to get you real deep, and it's not going to get you, if you're not already familiar with what luminosity masks can do, his training materials aren't exactly going to get you there real quickly. So until Greg comes out with better training materials, which I know he is talking about and potentially working on, I really would recommend ADP over Lumenzia at this point for the beginner who's trying to learn, just because the training material is included. Now with Rhea Pro, I know a lot of people love this panel, they use it all the time, and I really don't want you to think that I'm bashing this panel. I have nothing against Jimmy, he seems like a really nice guy, and I wish him success, but I really can't recommend this panel. I don't like it myself. I feel like it's very clunky, and you have to follow this very specific workflow, especially if you're using the luminosity masks. It's just light years behind the other panels, and it feels like you're going back in time to one of the original TK panels that created everything manually, and you had all these channels left over, and it's really slow, it's just messy. I don't like it, and it's very confusing. Jimmy's created a very specific way to blend his images, and it feels like he just created this for himself, for his specific workflow, and now he's pushing that workflow on other people, which is fine. Like, you can, if you want to develop your workflow to his, then this might be an option for you. Again, he has a lot of great videos. There's tons of training materials so you can learn more, but I just don't like the panel. If I had never used another panel before and I didn't know what else was out there, I'm sure I would put this to great use and it would be awesome. But knowing what I know, using these other panels, I can just see how old school it is, and I can't in good conscience recommend it now that I know what else is out there. Zone System Express, this is again a very specific tool to the way that Blake does his workflow. So it's kind of similar to Raya in that sense, is that you have to develop your workflow specifically to the way he works. And I'm not a big fan of that myself, because I think you need to be able to just use the tools the way you want to use them, rather than what he's set up for you. So it's something very different. Again, it's not luminosity mask at all, so it doesn't necessarily even belong in this review, but it always gets brought up with luminosity masks. And I can't say that I don't recommend this tool, because if you combine Blake's great tutorials, there's a ton of information, and he does a great job at teaching in his videos. So quite frankly, what you're paying for here is not so much the panel, because it's fairly basic. What you're paying for is the training behind it. And if you're trying to create an Instagram-ish look, the different filters and doing different color grading and stuff, then yes, this is the great panel for you, and especially the training materials behind it. So there you have it. Check out my blog post for further information and links where you can download all of these. And let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure everyone won't agree with my assessments, and if you really like Rhea Pro, for example, let me know. Tell me why. And if you've compared it to the other panels, please let me know. I would love to hear if there is something I'm completely missing and it's just totally awesome, but I don't see it. So to wrap it up, I love the TK panel for advanced users and the ADP panel for newbies.